want to welcome you all here. I'm just delighted to see so many. This is just a fun thing to do. We think this book is really important for faith communities in general, any kind of nonprofit, especially nonprofits that are doing justice work. We just think that this is important. I want to introduce my dear friend and colleague Nora Percival, who we collaborated together in this book because we both thought it was important. I thought Quakers knew everything about consensus, and Nora thought I knew everything because Evergreen was doing it just for what feels like a short time compared to the Quakers. Between the two of us, we learned a lot just in writing the book. So we just wanted to celebrate this event. I want to introduce a few people that are here. I haven't had opportunity to say hello to all of the ones who are present, but I especially want to lift up the person who wrote our foreword, Eric Law. He's waving his hands. If you don't know him, he's the founder and innovator of Kaleidoscope Institute. And they've put off, or he's slid out of a Kaleidoscope Institute meeting in order to be here. So he can't be here for very long. Another contributor that is with us is Sean Brown. Sean's waving. And another contributor who has to leave shortly. I'm not finding her immediately in my stream. And in fact, I'm going to ask Nora to introduce her.
My sister, Jill Wins, wave your hand, Jill. Thank you.
There she is.
Jill, in addition to having the honor to be in my family, is retired member and past president of the Board of Education for San Francisco and the California School Board Association. I'm not sure I have the exact title of that state association correct, but you get the idea. And was very active with those organizations at a time when they were trying to use consensus in bargaining. And she wrote a story that's in our book. It is, in fact, the one secular contribution to the book. And she has another meeting at 10 o'clock. So I think at this point so far, that's how many, those are the contributors who are here, right?
Yeah. And Eric, I want to invite you, since you need to leave, or you're here, if you'd like to say a few words at this point, I'd like to invite you to do that.
Thank you, Marcia. Thank you, Nora. Yes, and also, Marcia is on this side. Who know where it is on Zoom? It's also the president of the Kaleidoscope Institute's board. So I am grateful that she practice what she teaches and use it to empower organization I love dearly that I founded. So I am one who talk about consensus quite a bit, and a lot of my work has to do with being inclusive in engaging community, whether it's a local church or whether it's an association or synod or presbytery or diocese, all the different judicatory name, to make decisions that are inclusive of all the voices, especially the powerless. And finding it often frustrating because the system that is in place in so many of these organizations are so ingrained in the voting system, the majority rule voting, which is what the book addressed directly, which is really great. And often when I try to say, let's try consensus, and they'll go, no, no, legally we can't do that. You know, they have come up with all kinds of excuses, and there was the bridge missing from where the system is to how we can nudge them, move them into a more inclusive way of making decision, which would last, which would be upheld by the people, and there won't be any parking lot meetings, there won't be any backlash, all of that, you know what I'm talking about, right? Um, and often, as a person of color, I walk away from a meeting with the conventional voting debate system feeling I was not heard. Uh, and I didn't have, for a long time, the courage to get up and say something when everybody is seeing the few who speak are so eloquent, you know. And there was no invitation, there was no, you know. So I think this is a amazing book that not only describe what consensus is and what it is not, and it also give you the step to get there, and it is gentle to the existing system, explaining that and also moving forward. And as I said in the forward, there was so much misunderstanding and misusing the erroneous definition of a consensus, and the most of the time, consensus as defined by whoever is really about keeping power. And so understanding true consensus is crucial. And that's why I endorsed this book and happily wrote the foreword to this book, and encourage friends and colleagues and people I train to really read and digest and practice it. So is that good enough?
It's wonderful. You could have just said, no, I've already said it, but I really appreciate it. Thanks. Jill, knowing you have to leave soon too, do you want to say anything? Because I know we had to kind of encourage you to say anything about consensus.
Well, thanks for having me. I was on the Board of Education at first, when I first got on the board, which was in 1992.
Jill,
It was a time.
let me interrupt. The Board of Education for the San Francisco School District, is that correct?
Francisco Unified School District, excuse me. But it was a time when consensus decision-making in the public world was kind of popular. It was a thing that people were doing. I had the opportunity, we participated in a project which was a labor management cooperation project from the AFL-CIO, a nationally funded, foundation-funded project. For a number, I can't remember how many, 10 or more large urban school districts around the country. And we had a lot of meetings together. There was no Zoom in those days, so we went to Washington a lot. And then we also, some of us participated in a project at the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard, the grad school. I actually went with three times we took a group from San Francisco Unified to that training program at Harvard. The professor who noted a couple of things. One, it was quite amazing that the Kennedy School still had a professorship, a chair in labor studies, because that became out of fashion. They were putting in all kinds of privatization efforts and things like that. So she actually said to me, the next time you come, if you come again to this project, to this program, you're going to teach this program. And we were very committed to consensus decision making, and it took a huge amount of training. I mean, I remember days and weeks of sitting with people here locally to try to include more people and to discuss all their concerns about consensus decision making. When we got down to it, and we were part of this labor management project, the issue of bargaining, of course, came up all the time. And one of the things that I learned, which was why Marcia and Nora noted my skepticism a little bit, was that in the end, it was very difficult and only partially successful to get our labor unions to really commit to this kind of decision making. And sadly, I have to admit, it didn't last very long. I mean, the effects have been enormously lasting, because one of the main things we did was to completely rewrite the teachers union contract completely. It's fundamentally changing the way we did vesting for lifetime health benefits and pensions and things that make it possible for the district, which by the way is in financial problems right now, to sustain itself financially and to go on for the last like 30 years in a far stronger way. But with the change of leadership, we, and by the way, almost every other large urban district that was part of that Ford Foundation project, they were the funders, had changes in union leadership where people moved away from their collaborative work and into more adversarial bargaining and decision-making. So what I found is that with people who have power, and I was interested that Eric referred to that, when they have power, they think that consensus will mean they'll have to give up some power. And in order to teach them, not to say, oh, we know better than you, but for us to collectively get to the point where we realize that, in fact, you can have more power in that you can have more influence over the way decisions are made if you make a commitment to a process like this. So I have to say that philosophically and fundamentally, I really believe in consensus decision-making. I think it's really, really hard. And for partners that you have in this decision-making, where they either in reality or in their own perception have some power that they feel they need to guard in order not only to get better decisions, but more importantly, to win. If you have the idea that it's important for your personal or organizational goals that you are winners, that you not only have power, but you're able to show that you can wield it, then you have a real challenge before you. And I think it's much harder to do. I think that anybody that undertakes this kind of work, I give them huge kudos for engaging in something that's very difficult, but that in my experience, in the end, is a good thing to do. Thanks.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Jill. Thanks.
Thank you. We were going, I don't think there's anybody else on the verge of having to leave, and we were going to read a brief excerpt from the book, and I'm thinking this might be the time. Marcia, do you feel okay about that?
Please go ahead.
This is the book, which you could see also on Marcia's background, and it's available from Judson Press and also on Amazon and also from Powell's, all online, and also from us. I just once again put instructions in the chat for how to get a signed copy from us. Obviously, if you want a signed copy, you have to order them from us because we're not letting other people forge our signatures.
I think I met her once. She's a member of the Friends congregation in the U District or something.
That?
That's right.
I'm sorry.
Marcia brought her in for something. It may have been on consensus or something.
Dave, can we ask you to mute yourself? Thanks.
Oh, he wasn't talking to us.
No, I think he was talking to Merletta. Thanks, David.
What he was doing was trying to identify me. Yes, I'm a member of University Friends meeting, a Quaker meeting in Seattle. Okay, so I'm going to read. I'm going to start in the section, the chapter on why use consensus. When you use consensus, it is easier to make decisions that everyone can support. In addition, the process itself affects community interaction in many positive ways. It promotes inclusivity. It is more egalitarian and less patriarchal. It encourages a collaborative spirit. It fosters the emergence of unanticipated better solutions. It offers an alternative to avoiding issues for fear of stirring up trouble. It demonstrates the belief that everyone's voice is important. It shows that the people in the room are more important than the decision in question. It embodies the belief that how we work together is as important as what we do. And it clearly invites God into the process. Each of those sentences, which is a bulleted list, is then followed by a couple of paragraphs unpacking that idea. which we're not going to read. You have to read the book to get all the details. But then the chapter is summed up with a couple of paragraphs that Marcia is going to read.
And Nora, would you mind holding up the book? Because if I hold up the book, this is what you see.
Here is the book.
Thanks. So towards the end of that same chapter is, we say that consensus spiritually allows your community to embody the beliefs that everyone's voice is important and that the people in the room are more important than the decision in question. It also gives your community the experience of valuing how you work together as much as you value what you do. Most important for faith community, it clearly invites God into your business process and deeper into the life of your community. When your group does the work to learn how to use consensus and begins to receive the gifts it offers, the group becomes stronger and more responsive to members' needs. It also demonstrates its commitment to God, as in Micah 6:8. Surely there is no more crucial time than this for your community and world to become more resilient and vigorous by committing to live your faith. And I think that's a great segue, and in fact, it is in the book, to the story of Wedgwood. Sean Brown is currently the pastor of Wedgwood Community Church, and we invited him to tell the story. But Sean, can you just share with this group how doing consensus helps your church?
Yeah, well, the one thing that I kind of observed, so I was on the committee that rewrote the bylaws for our church, where we included consensus into the bylaws as the new way of doing decision making. And but because we rewrote the whole constitution and bylaws, our committee had to tackle lots of different things. But the pastor at that time was Curtis Price. And so he kind of assigned me to the consensus part of rewriting the bylaws to do some research around that. And as I did, as I was researching consensus, I realized that it kind of requires quite a bit of trust among the body of people. And then as you go through the process, I anticipated that it would create more trust. And so I have a lot of respect, first of all, for people who implement this model in bodies and organizations where maybe the trust level isn't there so much, and yet they start that process anyway. But what I found at Wedgwood was, so we implemented the process, and there were some hiccups with it logistically, like people, they kind of wondered what the point was, and they didn't like the sort of, at least how we implemented it with the different levels of consensus and the number system. And it took a lot of time explaining it before every single decision that we had to make. We had to explain the process, and the process actually of explaining it took more time sometimes than actually deliberating and making the decision. But as we continued and we stuck to our guns and we stuck with it, I started noticing changes in levels of engagement. People became more engaged in the process of making decisions. And people also realized that, this isn't just going to be an up and down vote. We can discuss this. We can become problem solvers. And in a sense, then everybody sort of had joint ownership of the process. And so there was more buy-in and more commitment. And so overall, I think that it has worked really well for us. But again, like in an ideal world, there would already be a degree of trust among one another before you get the process started. But then once you do, it only deepens and strengthens that trust factor.
Thank you, Sean. I really appreciate that. Susan, again, I know you need to leave. Did you have a chance to read the book before today? You're muted. You're muted, Susan.
Hey. Yes, I did read the book, Marcia. And I'm just so proud of you and Nora. I will say this, I'm also really annoyed at the two of you. Where has this been for the 20 years of my ministry? Okay, saying this, I needed y'all a long time. So I just can't think of a time that this book is more in need. I know I'm the pastor of a multicultural, diverse congregation in Midtown Manhattan, and whether it's conversations around gender or race or sexuality, or whether or not you're going to ask for vaccines walking in the door of COVID, or the carpet color that the deacons have chosen, it is just so important to have this tool. And I can't thank you guys enough for the book.
Sorry it took us so long.
How exciting to hear, though. Please
Yes, it is.
send us updates, and this is a general request to all of you and anybody you know who reads the book and uses what we have offered in the book in their groups of whatever size or kind. We would really like to know how's it going? What are your successes, and also what are, I hesitate to use the word failures, but what are the challenges that you find? Because as Marcia said, we're learning this too. So
Yes. Thank you. Thank you so much, Susan. That's a great endorsement.
Thank you so much.
We'll keep you in prayer as you go forward.
Thank you. And thanks for the book.
Oh, you're welcome. Jeff Woods is another person, and Jeff was so important to us. He has a quote on the back cover, but he was an early reader of an initial draft, and that helped us so much. So Jeff, I'm going to just ask if you want to say a few words. If you don't, that's okay. It's an invitation.
No, I appreciate that, Marcia. I feel like the book is a perfect combination of theory and then practical steps. And I feel like you often do not get that in one particular manuscript. I felt like the collaboration of you two as authors worked so well, also with your varied experiences, adjudicatory, nonprofit, other settings. And it is a great resource. I think it took 20 years because you needed 20 years of examples, and experience, to put in there. And so while, an earlier version may have been helpful, I do think the years of experience really enhance the book that is out now. Congratulations again. Yes.
Thank you, Jeff. And I would say, Evergreen is not yet 20 years old. We couldn't have written it 20 years ago. Nora and I didn't know each other.
I didn't have, although I've been a Quaker for, long time, well over 30 years. I wasn't familiar enough with all the nuances of the variations of how consensus in a faith community plays out until I'd done it for a few decades.
Go ahead, Nora.
No, I was just going to say, I think if I'm looking at my little cheat sheet here, Dorsey's not here and Doug isn't here. And so I think that means we're up to opening up the session for any questions or comments anybody else might have. Am I right, Marcia?
Yes, I was just about ready to say that I would welcome questions or comments from anybody. If you just want to indicate to us that you have a question, please wave your hand, put up a question. If not, I'm going to start introducing people that are here. Until I see somebody raise their hand, I want to recognize John and Joan Beck, who are other Kaleidoscope Institute collaborators. Joan heads up the Program Development Committee of Kaleidoscope Institute. They're both associates of Kaleidoscope Institute. And Linda Young is another associate of Kaleidoscope Institute. I think they either got out of a meeting early or have come in on a meeting. Harry Riggs, who just said hello to everybody, is the executive minister of the American Baptist Churches of Connecticut. And in my screen next to him is Cheryl Dudley, who's the executive minister of Metro New York. And I also want to recognize Jim Brenneman, who is the president of Berkeley School of Theology. I'm glad he had the initials there because I always forget how it's, but Berkeley School of Theology, former American Baptist Seminary of the West. Roseanne Vita is a Canadian, also a Kaleidoscope Institute person, and somebody has their hand up. Was it Virginia Holmstrom or Virginia Patton? Whichever one, please ask your question.
All right. Okay, so I know that you and Nora come from different faith traditions and have different nomenclature. I mean, in ABC, we've used mutual invitation and levels of consensus and all of that. And I suppose that Nora approached it with different terminology. How did you two reconcile how you would introduce this in a book to a general public? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Great question.
Go ahead, Nora.
Oh, it's a great question because we had a lot of conversations about it. Quakers are famous for having our own jargon, Quakerese for everything. And of course, Baptists have theirs too. But we really, as somebody pointed out, one of the strengths of this work is that we do come from different theological, spiritual orientations. And we really wanted to make the book accessible to as many faith communities as possible, even beyond Christianity. So we had long conversations about how do we neutralize, if you will, the terminology so it isn't too jargonish for either of our faiths. And we ended up basically choosing other words. We used the word facilitator instead of clerk, which is what a Quaker would say, or a Baptist would say. What would a Baptist say, Marcia? You have a couple of different words.
It depends. Moderator,
the
chair,
moderator,
president.
the pastor, the bunch of words, which is why I can remember because I know there's more than one. But neither of the Baptists nor the Quakers use the word facilitator for the person who is guiding a consensus-based meeting. But we use that word because in terms of English definition, it is generically correct and not associated with any specific religious sect. Does that answer your question? It was something we tried to do, so I hope we achieved it. Sorry, Marcia, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say that we have a similar kind of question from Larry Spangler, your friend, capital F and lowercase f.
Not capital F. She's just a friend. She's not even a Quaker.
Oh, okay. What logistical process did you two follow to write the book in the sense of doing first draft, reviewing, agreeing on language? You already responded a bit to agreeing on language. And yes, we did things by consensus. Generally, and that's very loose, I often wrote the first draft. Nora is a great person to take drafts and make sense of them. And so then she'd rewrite it and send it to me, and we'd go back and forth from there. That's in a broad sense what we do. We agreed on a general outline, tweak that over the time. And again, generally we'd say, well, you need to write this first, or you need to do this or that to each other. and many meals and many hours of conversation that it just deepened our friendship and made it a delightful process, actually. So
It was so much fun to work on this. Also, one thing we did that I think made it possible for it to actually get completed is that we met on a regular basis. It started out, I think, every 3 weeks. And then once we got a contract from Judson and had a deadline, we went to every 2 weeks. And we gave ourselves homework to do before we met again. And me being a deadline-driven person usually ended up doing my homework 2 days before we were going to meet, always left every meeting thinking I'm going to go right home and work on my part. And of course, life got in the way. But because we had those deadlines of, well, I'm meeting her in 2 weeks and we're going to be reviewing this stuff, so I have to get it done. At least for me, that was a very important part to keeping the process moving.
yeah, and I would say the other thing is Nora's still working at a variety of different jobs. She was working almost full time for a while for somebody who was really challenging, so that so she has a good excuse for waiting till weekends. I'm retired. I had no such excuses. So occasionally I would get done right away what my homework was, but it helped me too. And again, just the collaboration, because we would catch for each other what the other couldn't see. Yeah. Thanks, Marcia, for being here. Marcia Woodard is a dear friend and a colleague in the Philadelphia area. Also on the faculty at Palmer Theological Seminary.
I also want to introduce Wim Walden, retired Baptist minister and community organizer, dear friend, and spiritual mentor for me, along with John Landgraf. Of the people here, you are the two who I turn to for guidance, not so much in writing the book, but in my life. And I'm deeply appreciative of being part of your fan club.
I want to thank the pastors that are here. Former pastor Chris Boyer, he just is transitioning into a new position. Hopefully, John Armagost, Mindy Welton Mitchell was here. Who else? I guess right at the moment, that's all. Oh, Sam Kim is here. Thanks, Sam, for being here, pastor of Japanese Baptist Church.
I'm sorry that I missed the opportunity. We missed the opportunity to, oh, Mindy, you are still here. I'm wondering, Mindy, if you would be willing to say a couple words about the experience of Queen Anne Baptist when we used consensus in your recent meeting.
I thought that you might want to have me speak to that. So Queen Anne Baptist Church in Seattle is a small church that had clunky bylaws and Robert's Rules of Order, and it just does not make sense for the size church we are with the small one board of 5 people. Consensus is. It will help us fostering that community, that communal spirit, and it just made sense for us to start looking at that. And so we were going through the draft of bylaw changes, and Marcia is on the board at my church too, and she was like, we should go to consensus. And I said, yes, we should do this. And so we invited Nora to come in and do a training session with the congregation, open meeting, to do our leadership council meeting by consensus and using the agenda. And then we had our annual meeting. And the first thing we did, we did have to vote for the bylaws because that was required by the bylaws. But once we did that and voted in the consensus, we used consensus for the rest of our annual meeting. And then we've been using consensus since then. And it's been wonderful because we've used consent agenda. We've focused on the decision making and spent less time going through reports and things that are normal business meetings, and spent more time on conversation on the important things in the life of the church. And it's been a really wonderful process, and in some ways it was kind of mirrors what we were doing, because we weren't really, most churches don't really do Robert's Rules of Order. And that, my husband is also a member of my church, and he was on the debate club in high school, and he's like, "You're not using real Robert's Rules of Order." And I said, yeah, most churches don't, because they don't really know what it is. Consensus makes much more sense. It's much more, once you get into it, you realize this is naturally how groups often make decisions, when you have clear communication and understanding the roles and everything. So it was helpful, and it was very helpful having Nora come in as an outside, not a member of our church, didn't know anybody besides me and Marcia, to help facilitate that process. And that's what I'd highly recommend for those who are beginning this, is to bring in somebody who is from the outside, so it doesn't come directly from the pastor or from somebody on the board. But it was very helpful, and we really appreciate it. And I'm glad that the book's coming out, because one of the things we want is to make sure that future folks know why we came to this decision and how to move forward with it. So
Thank you so much, Mindy. I really appreciate that. And
I
Nora
wanna-
and I are willing to go other places via Zoom, or and that's how we had to do it when Queen Anne made the decision. Or if it helps to be in person, we're glad to do that too.
Words right out of my
Actually,
mouth.
oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Nora.
I just was, I started to interrupt you, and then I didn't, because I realized you were going to say exactly what I was going to say. So ditto.
Okay. I just wanted to also recognize Clem Winbush. She is the associate, I don't remember all the titles, I never did, at Evergreen Association for the next couple of months at least. Nora, or Clem, I don't know if you would like to say something about how you've noticed that consensus works in Evergreen Association. And then Sam, Kim, I'm going to give you a moment too, if you'd like to say something. But Clem, you need to unmute first. There you go.
I am. Hi, you guys. Congrats. This is awesome. I am watching consensus become exceptionally important and a wonderful process for us to get things done. Just recently in a meeting, we were talking at Seattle Baptist Union, and Mindy was part of that conversation, and some other folks, we were saying, wait a minute, why are we still trying to do Robert's rules and trying to correct each other in what the actual process is? Why don't we consider consensus? And in Evergreen, where it almost feels unreal to try to do a meeting using Robert's Rules of Order, because our minds don't function that way anymore. So thank you too for going this extra mile to add some other steps and clarify them, actually make them very clear to us. And we're excited. I have not yet read the book, but I hope to. I don't know if I responded the way you asked me to.
That's perfectly fine. Perfectly fine. Thank you. Sam, did you have a question or a comment?
Yeah, actually, I just wanted to say, I don't know, Marcia, if I've ever told you, but a big reason of why I became American Baptist, but particularly I wanted to join Evergreen in particular, was because of consensus. And I didn't know that actually once I got to know you, I knew where it came from, but I don't know if I ever actually told you this story, because I've had a couple of seasons in different denominations in the main line, like over a variety of traditions and theologies. And if some of you don't know, I'm Canadian. And I just really felt like the Robert's Rules Order, and I think a lot of the polarization of, America, I never could really find something that really made sense and fit. And it didn't even feel biblical, to be honest. Like, it just didn't really seem right in theology. And I think when I had heard about Evergreen and I heard about how they operate and they do consensus, I was like, well, that sounds amazing, but can that happen in the world? I just didn't know. but just because of your pioneering thoughtfulness and just the work that Evergreen put in to make it work, and just seeing the reality happening daily, is just really inspiring. And I'm just thankful for all the work that both of you put in, and just thankful for you, Marcia and Nora, to put together this book, because it's so relevant right now. It's something I think, if we can show the world that it actually works and it can be practiced, and it's beyond just idealism, it can really change the world. And I'm just so thankful to be a part of it. Just thankful for your courage and your bravery to do it in a time where I think a lot of people didn't dare to dream about it, dare to talk about it, and you did it. And it's not just a book of theory; it's actually a record of history of where we've gone, and a record of a journey, actually. And so I'm just really thankful for you. I'm just really praying that God puts this in the right hands, and just gives it a really good platform, because I just feel more than ever we need to hear these things. So I had mentioned, I hope you can, Nora, you and Marcia, you could both come on my podcast sometime that we could talk more about it in detail. But just really thankful for you both, and thank you for the work that you're doing.
Thank you. I really appreciate that.
I would like to point out that Dorsey Green has joined us. Hi, Dorsey. Thank you so much for coming. Dorsey is also a contributor to the book. She wrote a story about a consensus process, long consensus process we used at University Friends. I know, Dorsey, you've just joined us, so you don't know this, but all the other contributors to the book and readers who have been here were given the opportunity and took the opportunity to say a few words about whatever they wanted to say. And so I'd like to invite you to do that as well, if you wish to. It's only an offer, it's not a requirement.
Thank you. No, I will. I'm sorry I'm late. I just finished a therapy session. And I just want to say how much I appreciated the opportunity to write it, because it really, from a distance, it was a 10-year process for us. It's the piece on gay marriage in the Quaker tradition, and made me realize that we were making the same mistakes in the meeting about a totally different issue at the same time. So it was really helpful. And I look forward to reading the whole book, because if just writing 2 pages gave me that kind of insight, I can't wait to read the rest of it. And nice to see everybody.
Thank you, Dorsey, for being here.
May I ask
Another question? John.
Yeah, just out of curiosity, I was sitting here just rejoicing in all this. I've not read the book, I will. But as the numbers grow larger and you're trying to reach consensus, and there are 100 of you, or there are 500 of you, or there are 1,000 of you, what happens? I know that's a big balloon of a question.
Well, what happens in the Quaker tradition, because they're used to it, is different than what we suggest in the book. Because we generally addressed the book to people who weren't using it all the time. And we suggested what I'll call the evergreen way of doing it, which is dividing into smaller groups. Now, evergreen automatically goes into our caucus groups. So some of those groups are larger. The Euro Caucus is much larger. So it oftentimes, actually, if they're doing consensus well, they divide into even smaller groups. But you need to divide into smaller groups if you're a large group, so that everybody can be heard. You can't expect anybody to stand, even in a group of 50, to stand for people who aren't used to standing in front of a group to talk, especially if their opinion is slightly or significantly different from what they may be feeling the majority is doing. How you divide those groups depends. I am really a proponent that says divide the groups first so that those whose voices may be different can be heard. So if there's a thought group that's different, or, I mean, one of the reasons that makes evergreen is these ethnic caucuses, which allow a safe place for, Hispanics who may even speak a different language, or people from Asia. Again, we lump a lot of people together that may or may not think alike. We're not assuming that they think alike, but that at least initially is a safer group than a group that's dominated by the Euro caucus. So, but we both really affirm in the group or in the book that if you're dividing into smaller groups, to not always go with what the majority thinks is the right way to do it, random small groups, but to be thoughtful about how you're dividing up into groups. And so, like in Evergreen, one of the great things is that the Euro caucus may have 50 people at a meeting, and maybe the Hispanic caucus only has 3 people, but they both get the same voice when they come back together and say, we agree with this. And so if the 3 people from the Hispanic caucus say, we've got a question about this and we're not ready to say yes, we go back to we still have work to do. And I think that, again, you have to make sure that the voices can be heard. That's the important thing. Yeah.
If I may offer the Quaker perspective, which is somewhat different. We Quakers have been seeking unity is what we call it. We don't even use the word consensus among ourselves, but it's the same idea. Since the 1650s, so for a really long time. And we have developed a system based on committees. So basically, people who have a vested interest in some aspect of the work of the community join the committee that is empowered to address that. And it can be anything from, committee on homelessness to the finance committee. I mean, some committees are just the nuts and bolts of running the meeting, and others have to do a program. And we have developed over a long, long time the trust that we can, when an issue arises, we can give it to a committee that is tasked with taking care of that part of the life of the meeting. And if one doesn't exist, we will create it. So we created a committee on reopening the meeting house right after COVID shut everything down, an ad hoc committee, because that was an issue that was really important to some people. How do we get back to live worship and, coffee hour and children's program and all the things that we want to do in our meeting house? So we made a committee. Anyway, so we use committees. When issues come up, it goes to committee. The committee is empowered to seek whatever information they need, talk to everybody. Everybody else is empowered to give their input to that committee. And the committee works through like a caucus would. And then they come to the larger meeting with their proposal. They don't tell us what to do. They make a suggestion. And if it resonates with everybody, we come to unity. And if not, all the feedback about all the yeah buts goes back to the committee. And sometimes other people join the committee because they realize they're more interested in this than they thought, And so then it's a similar kind of back and forth between caucuses and a large group, but it's between a committee and the large group. And in the book, we say explicitly, if you don't have a really strong committee system and the committees are really functioning well and they really cover all the needs of the meeting, don't try to do it this way. Use the subgroup way, because that is easier for people who don't have this long tradition behind them.
Nora, thank you. And Chris wanted to say a word that might help Jim Brenneman's question. And if not, we'll then deal with Jim's question. Chris?
Thanks, Marcia. Yeah, and I just saw Jim Brenneman's question too and thought, and this is in part also in response to John Landgraf. I won't speak for the other caucuses because except for 1 week a year in Evergreen, I've always been a member of the Euro caucus. That 1 week a year, Clem can tell you about. But Euro caucus, perhaps unsurprisingly, it seemed to me, had probably the most difficulty of the caucuses in Evergreen getting our heads around consensus decision making. And a lot of it, Jim, yes, had to do with power structure. And one of the ways I think we dealt with that fairly successfully when we were doing the work appropriately was to divide internally in the caucus in a way that very subtly recognized power differential in the religious world. So when we would subdivide the Euro caucus, we would often divide into clergymen, clergy women, lay men, and lay women. And I was always of the opinion that perhaps there should have been yet another group for clergy spouses, because all of those groups tend to hold different levels of power in most churches, at least in most Baptist churches. And so by making sure that each group had to come consensus within their subdivided group and then give them one voice to report out, suddenly you had equality of voice and equality of power between those groups where normally, let's face it, the clergymen would have dominated. And so, it was very possible, as Marcia was talking about with, the balance of the caucuses, for one of those subdivisions of persons to say, hey, wait a minute, this doesn't feel right. We need to talk about this some more. And it really reduced the amount of railroading one generally sees in a church or association board meeting, because we all know what happens. But I really feel like that subdivision according to those unspoken levels of power worked well for the Euro caucus in Evergreen. I wouldn't presume to suggest to you, Jim, how you would do that at BST, but I'm sure that you can think of those groups right now.
I was going to just add on, Chris. One time we did split with people in Seattle area churches and then everyone who was not a Seattle area church because of the way Evergreen is constructed. And then Curtis Price always suggested that maybe we should do introverts and extroverts, but that was probably because Curtis would have been in the extrovert group.
That's a hard one. Not everybody wishes to self-identify quite so cleanly one way or the other. I'm going to interrupt just for a moment. I know that Wim has offered to talk about something that might be of interest to everybody, a follow-up on consensus at Sean's church. And Jim has asked this question, but I have to log off in 5 minutes exactly because, as Marcia said, I still work and I have to be at a job 8 miles from here at 11 o'clock. So, but that doesn't mean everybody else doesn't have to leave. Marcia's still here. It's all happening. But I just wanted to quickly answer Larry's question. Do either of you have another book in mind? And my answer is, Marcia and I talked about writing another book on consensus to include secular consensus as a follow-up. That because so many people asked us about it when we were writing this book, and we made a decision that we were going to limit this book to faith-based consensus, just so that the scope of the book would be within the boundaries we wanted. But we did talk, every time we talked about it, we said, that's the next book. So how realistic that is, we don't know, but it's out there. And Wim and I are writing a book on my experience doing health education ministry in East Africa. So that is definitely another book that's coming out of my brain one day. Marcia, do you have other books in your brain?
I always say no. There is my first book, which it's not gonna, there we go. It shows sort of intentionally inclusive, which tells the story of Evergreen and its beginning, which can help people if they don't understand why we talk about Evergreen being so important in it. I see that Judson Press has set this up to have us shut down at 10:30 our time. Might be 1:30 your time or something in between. I again just want to say thank you to everybody who has made time to show up and be here. I appreciate your support and encouragement to be here. I think, Jim, the issue of power is really important. I think one of the miracles when Evergreen was formed was that the Euro Caucus was so, many of the folks were so tired of the fight over homosexuality that they were willing to do anything. And by that, I don't think they realized the power that they were giving up when we made the decisions that we made. I'm very serious about that because I think, like for American Baptist Churches of Connecticut, which I've done did a little bit of work with, I think that's going to be the hardest thing is to help the Euro people realize that, yes, they may have to give up power, but in the end, they'll have a much richer experience altogether. And I don't know how you convince people that will be true if they're aware that they're giving up power. Again, I don't think the Euro churches got it. I sat there in amazement when they said, well, it shouldn't matter how much money a church gives. If they give money, then they should get the same representation as everybody else. And that came from Seattle First Baptist Church, which was the highest giving church at the time, in Evergreen. And for them to say every caucus, doesn't matter how big it is, should get 2 members on the executive committee. I mean, this is the subtle details which makes consensus even more important, right? So we set it up in such a way that equality between caucuses, so the equality between our small groups was embedded from the beginning. You may have to just squeeze it in there and hope people don't notice until after it's worked out. I do know that early on, and I sensed it was coming back, people were questioning, well, we don't understand why we're in caucuses. We thought that the thing here was unity. The end result would be unity. And well, it is, but you can't get to that unity until everybody has voice, and the caucuses allow that to happen. The Evergreen bylaws say, we hope one day caucuses won't be necessary, but until that day. And usually it's white men that ask me, well, when will caucuses not any longer be necessary? And my reply is always, I have no idea. But it won't be the Euro caucus that will say so.
I have to
It'll
go to
be
work,
the
my
other
friend.
caucuses that say so.
Thank you all so much for coming. It's really precious to feel all the support.
It is. Thank you again so much. Love you all. And I guess I think for the Zoom, until somebody closes us up, we can still continue. I see a lot of you hanging on. I think we may not be, well, thing still says live on Facebook. If anybody else still has a lingering question or something, I think we can, again, hang here on Zoom until we're done. We're finished on Facebook, but we can still hang here on Zoom. I don't want to keep anybody from hanging around, but if you have something that, okay, Wim, you were going to say something. Do you still want to say it?
Yeah. Yeah, I was just going to give an unsolicited testimony mostly, but I think probably I have a question that may be more important than the testimony. And that is, one of the great things for me about consensus is the ability to think about this decision as being a discernment of God's intent, rather than this is what I want. Now, introducing it that way is one thing, and having people continue to consider it that as they go through the process is a different thing. And so I'm just wondering, in your much greater experience than mine, if there are ways to kind of remind people about what we're up to here, that we're not just trying to get things to move the way we want them to. It's a finding how is it that God wants us to move.
So my sense is in Quaker meetings and even in Baptist meetings, that simply, especially if the process is feeling in the least bit toxic, is to stop and say, in the Quaker, they would say, let's have a moment of silence. Baptists would call us to prayer. And I'll even give this to ABC USA at one time when the executives and at the then GEC, General Executive Council, which was all the executive ministers and stuff, we built into the process that every hour we would have somebody read a piece of scripture and offer prayer.
Wow.
So you can build, they weren't seeking consensus, they were just seeking to listen to each other at that time. But you can build into the process those kinds of things by saying, maybe even more often, set up an alarm. We will have a moment of prayer or a Bible reading every so often, I think is one way of saying up front, God is part of the process.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe have some Psalms or specific scriptures, I would say to people, don't try to find the scriptures that are going to be on one side or the other, but find those scriptures that speak to unity, that speak to prayer, that speak to God being present and ever with us. Yeah.
Yeah.
Great question.
I'd add, Marcia, I always really appreciated when you were exec of Evergreen that you would start our business sessions with preparing for worshipful work.
Yeah.
And have the kind of Bible passage you're mentioning in prayer. And it got us pointed in the right direction.
Yeah, and I would recommend starting with Kaleidoscope Bible Study. And I tried to do that in Evergreen because I wasn't always in charge of how the meeting started. We didn't always do that. But I particularly appreciated when everybody got to participate in whatever kind of beginning of the meeting we were doing. So that, because usually that beginning of the meeting, we would at least go to prayer. So, or at least read scripture of some kind. So I really do recommend that as a beginning of getting started in meetings. I want to thank Linda and Gail, who are hosts of this meeting. They were planning on only an hour, and I want to just thank them for that, and just say thank you to all of you who have shown up. It's been great. We're anxious to get our books out to you, and hope you enjoy reading them. Tell us how using it has helped you. If we do write that next book, it will help even that next book. So
Thank you.
Yes.
thank you. God bless you all.
God bless.